Good morning, everyone. My name's Jeremy Raj. I'll be hosting the event today. I'm the National Head of Residential Property at Irwin Mitchell. Joining me today are Catherine and Helen, who you can hopefully also see in your screens. Catherine, Helen, can you give me a thumbs up if the sound is working okay? Double thumbs up. Excellent. Thank you. That's a good start. So we've got three of us. And we were chatting before we started. We're in Kent, North London and Yorkshire, respectively, all relying on our home Wi-Fi, and everyone has said that their home Wi-Fi works well. So let's hope that that turns out to be the case. We have got tech support on hand, so if you're having any problems, please do email in. There is a Q&A button that you should see on your screens that you can use to submit questions as we go along, as well as raising any tech issues. So as I mentioned, I'm the head of residential property. Helen is the partner at Irwin Mitchell who runs our conveyancing. We get through about 3,000 conveyances a year. And given that the team has offices from Glasgow to Gatwick, we think that puts us in a very good position to comment on the market generally, not just in specific areas. Turning to the format of today, I'm going to do a very brief intro, and then the main event is going to be based around the frequently asked questions that we've been receiving since the world changed dramatically a few weeks ago. We'll add a bit of colour to those, and those will be available to you and indeed are on our website already. We've already had quite a few questions when people signed up, which was good to see, although probably equally a bit of a reflection of how concerning the current situation is. And we'll be going through those and obviously questions that came up during the webinar. The webinar is being recorded and can be sent out to you afterwards. In fact, will be sent out to you afterwards. We also have a hub on our website that you can submit questions through, and of course all of our contact details on the website as well. So a little bit of background. Obviously, the country has been in lockdown for a number of weeks now, and shortly after the lockdown was announced, the government also issued guidance on the home moving process, and that has been pretty dramatic in terms of its effect on the industry and all aspects of the industry, although it's important to be clear what has and hasn't been stopped and what has and hasn't been restricted, and that's one of the key parts of what we hope we will be able to do for you today. I think it's fair to say that the government or the industry, the residential property industry, had an immediate response, which was to lock up shop and to work out who and how people could work from home. And we're beginning to see some really quite innovative responses, but it's also fair to say that we're at a very early stage of this. I clearly don't have any insight over and above you as participants as to how long the lockdown is going to go on. Irwin Mitchell has been doing its own modelling, as all responsible businesses have, but at the moment it's fair to say nobody has any real idea of how long this is going to go on for. But we are seeing different things happening in the market, and that is going to continue. So please bear in mind that anything we say today could very quickly be superseded by government announcements, by further restrictions, or indeed, hopefully, by easing of restrictions in the near future. I'm going to start with the frequently asked questions now. Quite glad to say that I don't need to do all the usual housekeeping. this being a webinar, if you need the toilet, I think you all know where it is. And if your house is on fire, you probably also know the right way to escape. Hopefully none of that will be relevant over the next 45 minutes or so. So let's go straight in. The big question, and one that we've had a lot from a variety of people, is can I still exchange contracts for my purchase? Helen, would you like to step in on that?
Yes, and the short answer is yes, you can still exchange. There's been no legislation which has prohibited people entering into contracts or continuing to carry out their contractual provisions, such as completing a transfer of a property. I think it's important to bear in mind that each case has to be looked at on its own merit. For example, if somebody needs a mortgage or if the property is vacant or tenanted, that will make a difference. What the Law Society have done is confirm that the standard conditions of sale, which are part of most conveyancing contracts, will prevail and will be incorporated. So if you are unable to comply with a contract, you would still be considered in breach during this time, which could ultimately mean paying interest or worst case scenario for a buyer losing their deposit. We would hope that people would act reasonably if completion did need to be delayed. But the conditions do apply. Given the regulations and recommendations regarding social distancing and self-isolation, it's important to check with your solicitor to see if they think you should proceed to exchange at this time, or if it's best to wait it out a little while.
Absolutely, and that kind of brings us on to the next question that we've had, which is from people who have exchanged contracts, and they're saying, what happens if I have exchanged contracts but I can't move due to the lockdown?
Well, as I said, you would be contractually bound to complete. However, again, we would hope people would act reasonably. If you have exchanged contracts and a completion date is set, get advice from your solicitor at this stage, see what they recommend. We've been discussing with some of our clients entering into a variation agreement, which would effectively vary the terms of the original agreement entered into prior to exchange. And that might include a provision to delay completion until after the regulations have been loosened. But your own solicitors will be able to advise you as to the best course of action based on your current circumstances.
That's clearly going to be the case for a lot of our answers. Do you want to put a bit more colour on that? We've got, I know, a lot of exchanges happening. What have you tended to see from people who are caught in this situation? Are they going for the delayed completion? Are they going for simultaneous exchange and completion, or is it a mixture?
Definitely a simultaneous where possible. So that's where we would exchange contracts on the morning of completion, and that would minimise the risk of completion failing should there be a problem. We are seeing clients continue to exchange and continue to complete, particularly where there's a vacant property or no change. Yeah. For example, we act on a lot of deceased estates, and provided there's only one buyer in the chain, there's no reason those types of transactions can't go ahead.
I know you were talking to me about one of those last week, and a sort of anecdotal bit of market evidence. We are seeing price dips.
We certainly are. Some buyers are jumping on this situation to try and negotiate a price reduction. In the case in question, it was a very big price reduction the buyer wanted, of around £100,000 on a property worth over £900,000. I thought it was a little early in the day to request that kind of reduction, but we've advised that client to speak to his agent and a surveyor to see what they think the future holds before agreeing to such a big reduction. It might be beneficial for some clients to agree a small reduction just to get a deal done, but each case will be different.
Absolutely. So clearly, you still can exchange contracts, but if you have exchanged contracts, then the practical arrangements may be a key issue. Are you finding that people are having problems getting removals companies?
Yes, that is a problem at the moment. The British Association of Removers has recommended to its members that they only carry out jobs that they've already agreed and that they cancel any other proposals or potential agreements they have in place. So if somebody does need a removal company to enable them to move, it's best to speak to a company first to see if you can instruct anyone. I think you would be lucky to find a removal company at the moment. But on the other hand, some people are happy to move themselves. If it's a first-time buyer, there might not be much furniture to move. But it's definitely worth bearing in mind if you do need a removal company.
And clearly, all reputable removals companies will be paying strict attention to the social distancing rules. And it's been pointed out in a lot of media and indeed industry reporting that it's very, very difficult to actually physically arrange a move whilst complying with the social distancing rules. Equally sadly, we have had reports that I've seen that there are plenty of people who unfortunately are finding the current situation very difficult financially. And so, you know, the classic kind of man with a van scenario, if people want to earn some money, we've had a little bit of market reporting about people who are very keen to earn some money in these difficult circumstances. So there is some of that going on too. Helen, what delays can people expect with their conveyancing at the moment?
Oh, well, there's a number of issues that need to be taken into account. So at Irwin Mitchell, we're certainly doing our best to be working business as usual as much as possible remotely. But for residential property transactions, we are reliant upon a number of third parties being able to complete their side of the job, if you like. For example, we have had delays on search results coming in. Thames Water, in fact, closed its office for searches recently, which is going to delay anyone in that area. There's various other local authorities that are struggling to work remotely and provide the search results as quickly as they normally would. Land registry, they're not taking any calls at the moment, so we're having to deal with them electronically, which again means that some applications are not coming back as quickly as we would like, which can delay ultimately completion as we have to carry out final pre-completion searches. We're also having a problem with some mortgage lenders in that if an offer's not yet been issued and a valuation's required, some are still insisting on physical valuations. However, we've had some news in this morning that more lenders are being prepared to accept desktop valuations to enable offers to be issued, which is welcome news.
Absolutely, and it's interesting that you mentioned mortgages. What are we finding in terms of mortgages going ahead? I know that the UK finance announcement a couple of weeks back was that all mortgages should be honoured for a period of 3 months. And I know your team has spent a lot of time and effort trying to find out in practical terms how that works.
That's right. Every lender that we've come across seems to be taking a different approach to this. We have had word in this morning that Santander is honouring all mortgages where contracts have exchanged for 3 months, which is welcome news. They've also suggested that any mortgage applications submitted before the 31st of March, which were accepted, will be automatically extended for 2 months. But we've seen other lenders who are not necessarily extending automatically, and they're dealing with it on a case-by-case basis.
It's an interesting conundrum, isn't it? Because UK Finance isn't a regulatory body that can insist that the banks and the lenders follow this advice. Although, having said that, in the past, most banks and lenders have pretty much done whatever UK Finance have suggested and said they need to do. It will be interesting to see whether the FCA, who do have more powers, will get involved if banks and lenders don't fall into line with what the government has proposed. Mm-hmm. I mean, sticking on the theme of mortgages, can remortgages still go ahead?
Yes, there's absolutely no reason a remortgage shouldn't take place. If the offer's already been issued, there could be a slight delay on drawing down the funds just because lenders are stretched at the moment, dealing with all the borrowers who want payment holidays and have got inquiries about ongoing payments. But generally, there's no reason why, if you are in the middle of a remortgage, that shouldn't proceed.
You've partially answered this already, but if people are waiting for mortgage offers, could you give us a little more information on that? Is it being affected by the lockdown? What should they expect in practice? What are your people seeing?
We have had some offers come in over the last 2 weeks for clients who started the process prior to lockdown from various lenders, particularly the high street lenders. So we're not seeing a complete stop to offers being issued. However, I imagine for the next couple of weeks, it could be potentially delayed. Again, there's the issue of the valuation, and if a lender is insistent upon a physical inspection being undertaken, then obviously that will delay matters. But what we're seeing is more and more lenders are being pragmatic about accepting a desktop valuation in these circumstances. And it seems to be that it will depend on a number of factors, such as the loan to value sum and the eligibility of the borrower.
Helen, I don't know if you've seen, but we've literally just had a question come in from one of our participants. It cuts right across what we're talking about at the moment, which is presumably why this chap has raised it. I'm currently waiting on evaluation on a property I've been accepted for, but this can't be done due to social distancing measures. I'm worried that if this goes on for months, that I am not going to get my mortgage offer through in time. Could you say a few words about that question?
Yes,
please?
I think that the best thing to do is either speak to your financial advisor who set the mortgage up for you, or directly to your mortgage lender to see if they could propose any timescale in terms of whether they will be looking at accepting desktop valuations. Of course, what would be important to bear in mind, however, is even if your lender will accept a desktop valuation, you yourselves might want to have a survey undertaken, and that might not be possible.
Yeah, because he does say it's a property that he has been accepted for, so it is a new purchase for him by the looks of it, which makes it that bit more difficult, because you clearly, in line with our standard advice for anybody buying a property, it is so much better if you get a survey and an inspection done. In terms of practical stuff, I know I was talking to one of the members of our team who last week spent 3 hours on the phone to a bank that shall remain nameless, but they're all struggling, aren't they? They don't have enough numbers of people in their call centres. They've got people off sick, and they've got a lot of people contacting them for mortgage holidays. Is the reality just that people have to suck it up and sit on the phone for hours?
I think potentially for the time being, yes. Although I do think things are settling down and people are getting more used to working remotely, which might see a bit of an improvement over the next couple of weeks with the way inquiries are being dealt with. Yeah.
Okay. Inquiries are coming in thick and fast now. We'll try and keep reasonably to schedule, but I think if people are out there with questions, we'll do our best to answer them quickly as we go along. Matthew has asked, I'm about to exchange and complete. Do you recommend I renegotiate the price down by $5,000 and that I require I amend, and would that require I amend my current mortgage offer? Shall I just take that quickly? Yes.
By all means, yes.
Any change in price, unfortunately, would necessitate a renewed mortgage offer, and that's a standard part of the process that I'm afraid is very slowed down at the moment. So if you're talking about £5,000, I would weigh it up very, very carefully. What all good lawyers do is smartly sidestep any questions of how much you should renegotiate by. If you know your solicitor well, they may be prepared to say something to you off the record, but actually lawyers aren't there to give you purely commercial advice on what a property is worth at any given time, although I can add in that the most recent estimates that I've seen, I think it was Knight Frank yesterday, possibly the day before, were that they're seeing 2 to 6% reductions in prices. So I don't know how that compares with your purchase price, but I offer that as the only way that we can answer a question of that nature at the moment. I've got, actually the third one just says good morning, which is very nice. Thank you, Charlotte. Good morning to you. So going back to our list of frequently asked questions, I think I may have mentioned in the preamble, we have offices from Glasgow down to Gatwick. Helen, you supervise our Gatwick office, where we have, I think, seven fee earners.
Glasgow office.
Sorry?
The Glasgow office.
The Glasgow office, sorry. What's the situation in Scotland, briefly?
Well, it's very similar to what we're seeing here because obviously they're subject to the social distancing regulations as well. The Registers of Scotland are currently closed to paper applications, which is causing some delays, wayfinding in our team, in registering transactions. However,
I think there was some emergency legislation passed yesterday, actually.
There was.
Which automatically extends. I'm not sure quite how it works. I don't know if you know, but the mysteries of the Scottish system. No. As you say, it's broadly similar, but we do have a Scottish office who will be able to answer questions if that affects anybody directly. So going back to the sort of standard questions that we're getting a lot of, well, what happens if I haven't exchanged contracts and the value of the property decreases?
Okay, well, you're not obliged to proceed with a sale or purchase until the contract is exchanged. So there's no legally binding agreement between the parties until exchange takes place. So if the value of your sale decreases, you can certainly delay the sale, or you can come to an agreement with your buyer to a price that you're prepared to accept. But there's absolutely no need to proceed if you are a seller and a buyer asks for a price reduction that you don't agree, provided you've not exchanged. Obviously, if you have exchanged, the price will remain as what it was at the time of the exchange.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, always important for people to bear in mind that our system works very much on a nothing is binding until you have actually exchanged contract basis. And that rule applies now as much as at any time. So looking a bit more to the future, I said earlier there's absolutely no way we can predict how long this current state of affairs is going to last. But bearing that in mind, we've had various inquiries from clients of different types saying they're planning to sell a property when the lockdown is over. Is there anything they can or should be doing now?
Well, we have had a number of inquiries still coming in relation to people looking to move properties. You can certainly speak to estate agents and get your property on the market based on a desktop valuation. That's certainly possible. And clients who instruct us we would usually do a quick check of the title to make sure there's nothing glaringly awful that might crop up when a sale has been agreed. Obviously, if there is, we can deal with that now, get the paperwork in order so that once lockdown is over and a buyer's found, those transactions can complete relatively smoothly, we would hope.
Sure. I mean, we as solicitors have been saying for many years that the earlier clients get in contact if they're talking about a sale, the sooner that we can check the title, check there's nothing major missing. There may be practical difficulties, obviously, getting answers from managing agents and others if it's a leasehold property. But doing a bit of prep now is clearly good. So another question, the new build scenario is quite an interesting one because clearly the construction industry has been very hard hit by this. So developments that are ready, there's absolutely no problem with people moving into new build developments. If they're not finished, it raises a whole bunch of questions. One of the questions that we'd had frequently asked was, I'm buying a new build and exchanging with completion on notice. Can a developer serve the notice during the lockdown?
They can. There's nothing to stop developers serving notice once the property is build complete. Generally, when I've dealt with new build transactions, the notice period is around 10 to 14 days in which completion must take place. If you think that if you're buying a new build property and you think it may be build complete anytime soon, speak to your solicitor and get them to liaise with the developer to see what their intentions are, because again, that contract would still be binding if a notice was served, but hopefully the developer would be reasonable.
Aha, we've obviously triggered something in one of our participants. Good morning. If I'm in the process of purchasing a new build property through Help to Buy but haven't yet exchanged contracts, can I get my reservation fee back? And can I recover the cost of search fees already incurred? Thanks, Richard. Catherine, you've been sitting very patiently. Catherine is our property litigation specialist and is on hand, no pressure, Catherine, to help us out with any sort of situation. Typically, these sorts of reservation fees tend to be £500, £1,000. If there's going to be an argument, what's your sense as a litigator as to where it might go?
Well, I think you're going to have to look at what the terms of the contract are, basically, to be able to determine whether it's a refundable reservation fee. I think more often than not, it tends not to be. It tends to be a fee that is just paid, almost like a bit like a deposit to reserve your place, to ensure that you have it, and they'll take it off the market subject to you doing any searches and other, and then proceeding on to exchange and completion. I think similarly it will be the same with the search fees that you've probably incurred. You will want to have a look at the contract though, just to determine what the provisions are. But my advice is, sadly, I think it's probably a case of, unless you're wanting to proceed, which certainly in the circumstances you're able to do so, providing you're willing to wait a few more months for lockdown to obviously be sort of released from. But I think it's a case of it's probably a cost that you'll have to incur and either move it forward or take it down as a loss.
Yeah, I mean, presumably that's small claims territory, or likely to be.
Yeah. So anything under sort of £10,000 would be a small claim. The difficulty you have is you're touching upon potentially the frustration argument that's being bandied about between litigators at the moment, whether COVID-19 warrants any sort of frustration arguments, and it's totally based on facts and circumstances.
That's a really interesting point. Do you think that there is going to be a test case or anything of that nature quick enough to give us a sensible answer? Because at the moment, it's so hard for anybody to tell how this will be viewed by the courts. Any way that we could get sort of guidance through barristers or judges, or is it's just too soon?
I think sadly it's just too soon. I mean, we as litigators are being told that all hearings that are more than half a day which inevitably this sort of claim potentially could be, are being postponed till they can sort of sort out video conferencing or whether social distancing measures are relaxed to allow hearings to take place. So I think fortunately we're at a bit of a stalemate here as to how this will move forward.
Yep. Okay, we're going to skip back a little bit. Thank you, Catherine. Someone's asked another question. What about buy-to-let mortgages? How are they affected in this climate? And are investors shy of investment at this time? I do deal with a lot of investors, so I would say that investors are looking at this as a potential opportunity, but at the moment there hasn't been a sufficient dip in prices for them to think, brilliant, this is the time to pile in, but they're all watching it very carefully. In relation to buy-to-let mortgages, there is no problem with actually completing on those, particularly if you've got a sitting tenant, because that means that they're already in, they won't need to move in. But again, the advice that we gave about having a physical inspection of a property still stands, and the practical issues of what your lender is going to do may get in the way. Helen, is that okay, or did you want to add something to that?
No, I agree. We act for a number of buy-to-let clients, if you like, in the team in Sheffield. We're seeing those instructions still coming in, and we're seeing clients who want to proceed with those purchases. There's no reason why they can't, provided they can get the funding in place.
Okay, we've had one more inquiry, which I think is particularly relevant to what we've been discussing. We are being pushed to exchange contracts at the moment. Our solicitors are asking us whether we would like to add a clause in the contract which will add a further 20 working days to any agreed completion date due to COVID-19. That's interesting. I mean, Helen, you'll know too, the Law Society recommended COVID-19 clause is drafted on the basis of a 3-month potential delay. We've adopted that with a 6-month potential delay, subject to what clients want us to do. Now, these things always have to be negotiated, and normally they are negotiated via the estate agent. If your estate agent is still open, you need to be discussing with them. A 20 working day delay, depending on when you were going to set the completion date for, is not that long. At the moment, we're urging people to err on the side of caution. However, there are plenty of reasons why people need to move house. The usual kind of death, divorce and taxes and school years and catchment areas and all those things, job changes, hold true as well. So you may not have the flexibility or the luxury of being able to negotiate on that basis. Helen, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I don't think so.
No? Okay, fine. So we've already confirmed that it's perfectly possible to move into a new build house. What happens if I've exchanged contracts for the purchase of a new build house and construction is delayed?
Okay, well, that is a clear possibility in the current climate, and generally contracts for the purchase of new build properties must comply with the Consumer for New Homes regulations, and that allows builders to, well, it doesn't allow them, it accepts that there could be reasonable delays, and that's accounted for in the contract. And I think given the current self-isolating regulations, a delay at these times would be considered acceptable.
Yeah. Okay, so we've had a follow-up question from your earlier answer, Helen, which says, however, are we not better off asking for the simultaneous exchange and completion that Helen mentioned earlier to prevent any charges, since we cannot be sure how long this pandemic will go on for?
In an ideal world, yes. because then you would know that the completion date was fixed. I think the problem there is often other parties are keen to get some commitment and get things under contract. But yes, in an ideal world, a simultaneous exchange and completion might be best if we're uncertain of when completion can take place.
Yeah, and just to be clear, some of the practical difficulties with that are you don't have the certainty until you've exchanged that completion will take place. So squashing it into a single simultaneous event can be difficult, particularly also because you might need, if there is any sort of chain involved, the participation of banks, etc. And some of them are taking a little bit longer, fair to say, to release mortgage money.
Yes, we have seen some delays from mortgage lenders, and certainly in normal circumstances, I would never recommend a simultaneous exchange and completion where there's a chain. It's not ideal, and it's quite stressful for the people moving house, waking up that morning not knowing if they are actually moving or not.
Yeah, understood. Yeah. Okay. So back to our frequently asked questions. Catherine, I'm going to bring you in. Sorry, we've got one more on the frequently asked questions. What happens if I've exchanged contracts for the purchase of a new build house, but I'm unable to complete the sale of my current house? I think the last one, Helen. Sorry, this is the last one.
Yeah, okay. So your solicitor would need to look at the contract for both the sale and the purchase to check the terms. Obviously, if you need funds from your own sale to enable you to complete the purchase of your new build property, you're going to have a problem if that buyer cannot proceed. It could be that a variation clause could be agreed, a secondary contract entered into, like we mentioned earlier. But if you do get wind that your buyer will have difficulties, then speak to your lawyer straight away to see what agreement can be come to with the developer.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good advice. Just before we move on to the next section, the last section of the FAQs, we've had another inquiry in. Any experience of whether builders are still able to work on projects according to social distancing rules, i.e. 1 or 2 on site at most? Interestingly, I spoke to a senior figure in the residential property industry who is currently living in a flat whilst his house renovation proceeds. So it's anecdotal, but I can confirm that there are certainly instances where building is proceeding. This is a project that started well before the actual lockdown was imposed, and the builders are on an empty site and apparently able to observe social distancing. In terms of the wider industry and larger projects, we do know that a lot of them took a little while to implement fully the social distancing rules, but that a lot of them have been shut down now. There was a bit of a public outcry in terms of how it would be possible for social distancing to be observed if you had multiple builders or workmen on a site. So I think the reality is it's pretty difficult to keep that going. I don't know if either of you have any other examples of that.
I've got a client who was hoping to move into a new build property in June, but that's now been put back because work has stopped on that particular development. Yeah.
And again, as always, it's a case of looking at your contract. Sorry, a lot of new build purchase contracts will have a long stop date, which in compliance with the House Builders Code is normally 6 to 9 months after the builders originally expected that their property would be completed. And obviously this is a massive spanner in the works and goes back to what I was discussing with Catherine, i.e. is this going to be a frustration event? Is it going to be seen generally by both the industry and by insurers as something that people will just to accept, or are there going to be claims? As ever, the litigators will be in on this as soon as there is an opportunity. Okay, we've had a couple more questions, but I'd like to move on to the final section of our FAQs. Catherine is a property litigation specialist as opposed to an enfranchisement specialist, but we do have a specific team for enfranchisement as well. Catherine's kindly agreed to lead us through where we are in terms of the legal situation and the litigator's view. So starting off, Catherine, how are lease extensions and freehold purchases being affected by the lockdown scenario?
So at the moment, there's actually no specific government guidance relating to lease extensions or enfranchisement, which is the purchase of a freehold by leaseholders. However, I certainly suspect, and I'm sure we're probably seeing, that due to the social distancing guidelines that have been imposed by the government, surveyors may no longer be able to inspect properties and provide valuations. Whether those valuations be done by desktop, we'll have to wait and see, I think. So I certainly think if someone is in the process of doing a lease extension or enfranchisement, it's probably worthwhile giving your surveyor a call to see if any valuation will be affected, or whether any potential inspection can still take place virtually, to see if that will affect the transaction. As part of your claim, you may be required, obviously, to apply to the first-tier tribunal or county court. At the moment, these institutions are not holding hearings. However, they are operating by email, as I mentioned previously. Certainly, hearings that are taking more than half a day are being done by telephone at the moment, but there's a vast majority of those, and anything that goes over that period of time are being postponed generally. And we aren't given any indication as to when they will be put back in the list, so to speak. Obviously, your solicitor may be able to apply to the court or the tribunal, but there may be a delay in getting a hearing date, as I just mentioned. Lease extensions and freehold purchase claims have to run to tight deadlines, for example, to provide deposits, serve counter notices, and to make tribunal applications. It's something that if that is imminent, you probably want to speak to your solicitor, who should be able to advise you in relation to any difficulty in meeting these deadlines.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we've obviously been monitoring our business since these new regulations came into place, and people react in different ways to this scenario. But actually, our leasehold enfranchisement team has been as busy as ever, and in fact has probably fielded a lot more inquiries than they have had on a regular basis. So, you know, the fact that not everything is shut down is particularly visible in this area. Catherine, are people able to start lease extension claims at this point?
Absolutely. There's nothing actually to stop people starting any form of lease extension claim at the moment. In fact, because the term of your lease is continuing to decrease, it might be a reasonable time to consider doing it. In addition, it's anticipated that there will be a slight drop in property prices, as we've mentioned earlier, and therefore it may mean now that it's the best time for you to try and secure a lower premium or price in relation to that lease extension. Obviously, in order to start the claim, you'll need to serve a notice on your landlord, and the notice will need to include a reasonable premium that you're prepared to pay. This brings on the valuation point that I mentioned earlier, and trying to get a surveyor involved to be able to provide that valuation. This premium will obviously be based on advice from a surveyor who specialises in that field, and an inspection will need to take place to ensure that that valuation is right, and certainly, hopefully, that they'll be able to do a desktop valuation in order to provide you with a proposed premium.
Yeah, you mentioned there serving the notice on the landlords. Do landlords get extra time to respond to these notices?
No. Unfortunately, the law has remained completely unchanged in this area. No extensions have gone on through the Coronavirus Act, so to speak. So if you think that you're going to encounter difficulties in meeting any of those deadlines, it's advisable that you try and speak to your solicitor.
Yeah, so we've got these kind of very rigid rules relating to the legislation for lease extensions and enfranchisement. that may not be possible to follow. So once it's started, it sets in train a set of deadlines. That's quite difficult for people. On the other hand, can you do voluntary lease extensions at the moment?
Yes, absolutely. And it might be a sensible way to try and avoid the tight deadlines that you're having to necessarily follow. By entering into a voluntary agreement, you can obviously sidestep the requirement for valuation as well, which would avoid then a desktop valuation or a surveyor having to come in and inspect and value the property. Obviously, it's a case that you would need to speak to your solicitor to ensure that you understand the risks involved with entering into a voluntary lease extension, though.
Sure. Thank you for that, Catherine. We've had a very polite request from Richard to take us back, Helen, to something that we were discussing earlier. He says, looking ahead to the change in the Help to Buy scheme, excuse me, coming in on 31st March 2021, where they're going to lower the £600,000 limit for houses outside of London. If COVID-19 pushed completion beyond that date, do you think the Help to Buy deal will be honoured? Sorry, I know you want to move on. So that's absolutely fine, Richard. That's what we're here for, and it's actually nice to know that people are interested and we're answering some useful stuff. So did that make sense, Helen? I mean, my initial reaction is if the offer has been made under the current Help to Buy legislation and it's for a contract that is validly completed, after things are delayed and the new regime comes in, I think it would play incredibly badly if the government didn't honour that. And, you know, we've had a total hiatus on movement in the market. And more importantly, the builders would be in a position to turn around to the government and say, you put us on lockdown, that's why we weren't able to complete this development in time. Having said that, do I have any statutory or other authority to say in that? I'm afraid I don't, but that's the best answer I can give you at the moment, Rich. Okay, fine. We also had a few questions that we thought we would just cover off, which were submitted in advance, and then we're going to wrap things up. I think we've had one more question just come in, and we will try and deal with all the inquiries that come in. The question was, do you have any ideas to aid exchange whilst protecting both parties in the current climate? We've kind of covered it, but I don't know if there's anything more you want to say at this stage.
I don't think so. I think just that your solicitor will take into account the circumstances of that transaction, and it might be possible to vary the contract by entering into a secondary contract.
Sure. I'm trying to multitask and failing miserably, but just sending a message back to Richard, who has thanked us for your previous answer, Helen. I need to know my limitations. Being a bloke, I can only do one thing at a time. Not a funny question here. Unfortunately, the question was submitted. I had to pull out of my house purchase as I was furloughed. We were very close to exchange at the time. My mortgage offer runs out in June. Is it likely that they will extend the offer? If so, should I keep the communications open, even though my employer might make me redundant when furlough is over? That's the first part of the question. Helen, I don't know if you want to say something on that.
Well, sorry to hear of that situation. It must be a difficult time. I think what you can certainly keep the negotiations ongoing, but you must stay in close contact with your lender. There's no guarantee that they will automatically extend the offer, so certainly wouldn't commit to exchange at this time. And again, keep in touch with your mortgage lender or your financial advisor to make sure that you will be able to get a mortgage should you proceed.
Yeah, I mean, if the mortgage offer runs out in June, I think there is time for banks and other lenders to put more resource in place and hopefully you will be able to get a specific answer well before June. I would say hold your nerve for the moment. There's an interesting second part to that question, which might be more Catherine's territory. My mortgage advisor is also threatening to charge me the commission on the mortgage if I don't take it, which I can't afford. Is he allowed to do that?
So I think, again, it comes to a contractual issue. We'd need to see what your arrangement is with your mortgage advisor to see whether it's something that they could suggest to be able to see whether that was something you had to pay in any event. I think given the current circumstances, it does seem very harsh, but it's a case of we'd need to see what the contractual relationship is. Yeah,
I mean, I have to say instinctively, it feels to me as though if the mortgage is definitely not proceeding due to primarily the furloughing and COVID-19, the mortgage broker is going to have a bit of a struggle to recover the money. Okay, what is the position with regard to new tenants to a property for access, viewing and concluding the transaction? Helen, I was reading some interesting stuff before you answer, sorry, about the first deal that has been agreed entirely online following a virtual viewing, and that was reported last week, I think. So the industry is adapting. It's probably going to take a while before that becomes anything like statistically relevant or a decent proportion of the market, but it proves it can be done. Did you have any other thoughts, Helen?
No, I think I think that will become more the norm, but it might take some time. And I think general everyday buyers might want to physically visit properties, which obviously isn't possible at the moment.
Yeah. So we had a slightly related question from somebody else. What is the position in terms of tenancy checkouts and key handovers that are due to take place during lockdown? The advice doesn't seem terribly clear on this point. Well, I have to agree, there is no clear advice on this, but what there is advice on is the social distancing requirements, and those are pretty strict. One of the things I was talking to an agent last week, and they were saying they're making much more use of lockboxes. People that have stayed in Airbnb properties or others will have come across these lockboxes where you can drop off the key and it's done on a pad, which clearly can be wiped down, etc. If a property is vacant, there is nothing to stop people going into that property to look at it. There is nothing to stop them moving into it and either taking out a rental contract on it or indeed buying it. I suspect agents, in the same way that we have letterboxes, might be finding these lockboxes for keys a lot more useful than they have up until now. Don't know if you guys want to add anything extra to that.
No, I agree.
No, happy with that. Okay. There was a specific question. I think we probably answered it. I was about to have a valuation done on the property that I had been accepted for. Where does this leave me given current circumstances? Helen, you mentioned the report that you and I saw this morning about desktop valuations. Don't know if you want to add anything to what we said before.
No, just that hopefully more lenders will get on board with that way of working to enable offers to be issued. So check with your lender to see if they're going to proceed on that basis. Yeah,
absolutely. Another question from one of our participants. In a situation where we are purchasing a new build property from the builder on a part exchange basis, will the process simply be delayed until the new property has been built? Well, again, part exchange is going to be more difficult. The builder, if you have not exchanged yet, is entitled to back out of any part exchange deals prior to exchange. And it's hard to see, unless the unless the development has been completed, it's hard to see how a developer would be wise to be taking on even a vacant property in the current market. So I suspect that is going to be delayed, unless anybody wants to add anything to that one.
No, just that if it has already exchanged, then there should be no problem with the completion taking place. Given,
Yeah, absolutely.
Just a one-person move.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think we're out of questions, and I think we have taken up plenty of people's time. I know that we had questions as we went along that we managed to answer. I hope everybody's found that useful and informative. I mentioned at the beginning that it is very early days for our reaction and the industry's reaction. We will be closely monitoring everything that is happening. Catherine in property litigation, our whole enfranchisement team, Helen's conveyancing team, and the others that deal with buy-to-let, help to buy, right to buy, and anything effectively to do with residential property are here for you. I think there are details of the Coronavirus Hub and updates that should have appeared on your screen, so please feel free to use those when you can. And thank you for being with us this morning. Thank you to my two participants for your input. Have a good day, and I hope everyone stays health and safety, stays happy and healthy. Bye.